There are multiple different ways to track form submissions in Google Analytics depending on the type of form you're using. Hi, I am Muna from Munalytics, and this is part 2 in my 3-part tracking conversions in GA4 series. In this part of the series, I will be showing you 5 different ways that you can track form submissions. If you already know what type of form you have, feel free to jump to the relevant point in the video. The first step is to identify what type of form you have. I usually always start with submitting the form myself and just seeing if it leads anywhere. The 5 different methods we're gonna cover tracking in this video are: 1, thank you page. If the form leads to a thank you page, this is probably the easiest way. 2 is using the form submission trigger that's built within GTM itself. 3 is element visibility, when a thank you message pops up just below the submit button on the form or similar. 4th is Ajax forms. These are a special type of form that do not refresh on submission. And 5th is iFrame forms, forms that are embedded onto the page. Now that we've covered that, let's jump into Google Tag Manager and get right into it. The majority of items that we try and track usually start with a trigger. A trigger is essentially a listener listening to something that's going to happen on site. After creating a trigger, we usually create a tag telling it what to do once it hears this certain event happening. For the purpose of this video, I have put a bunch of forms on my site, which should hopefully have different outcomes and are different types of forms. As mentioned before, the first thing I normally do is fill out the form itself and just see what happens when I submit said form. In this case, after submitting this form, I was taken to the thank you page. This can be set up with a really easy trigger, which is a page view trigger. And we want this to fire when the page URL contains thank you. Make sure you give it a relevant name. Most forms have the option, even iFrame forms, to lead the person to another page upon successful form completion. This is probably the easiest way to track form submission. Now that we've set up a trigger, we want to set up a tag. So we're going to create a new tag. Going to be a GA4 event. Make sure that you name it something relevant. For measurement ID, you need to get your GA4 measurement ID. It does help if you store it as a variable. For event name, I'm going to call this one form thank you. And I'm going to use the trigger we just set up and save this event. As a note, I will be testing all forms at once at the end of this video. If you wanted to see the debug view, feel free to just jump to the end of this video. The second method we're going to look at is the form submission trigger. So we can set up new. For this case, I'm going to select all forms. If you did want to filter because you had multiple forms, you could do with some forms. Choose a new built-in variable, look for form ID. When you inspect your page, you can find the form ID. But as mentioned, we're going to use all forms. Again, I have my trigger. I need to create a tag. Google Analytics, GA4 event, GA4 ID. Event name, I'm going to call this one form trigger. And I'm going to use the trigger that's form submission. Save. I'm purposely naming these ones different so we can see when each one fires rather than having the same event fire over and over again. Element visibility trigger. So let's say we were to fill out a form. So we're testing our form. And after submitting the form, we'll see this little thank you message pop up. Inspect this message. And in this case, I am looking at the class. And I want to take this class. And I'm going to use this class as part of my trigger. So we're going to go into triggers. Set up a new trigger. This case is going to be element visibility. CSS selector, you're going to put in dot and then paste that. The rest of the settings you can leave as is. Make sure you give it a relevant name. And again, we're going to need to set up a tag. with this, going to be a GA4 event tag. Use your GA4 ID and give it a name. So I'm going to call this one form element. Trigger is going to be the trigger we just set up. Next, we're going to take a look at Ajax forms, which are usually used because they are dynamic and they can pre-populate some of the previous answers later on down the form or change the options based on answers that were given. Essentially, what we are going to do is use another code pickup when there's been an Ajax form submission. I personally use the code from Analytics Mania. Great resource if you haven't checked them out. And what I'm going to do is take this code and copy. In Google Tag Manager, I'm going to set up a new tag. It's going to be a custom HTML tag. I'm going to paste the code and I'm going to fire it on all pages. I'll provide a link to the Ajax code and this in the description of the video. Essentially, what this code does is when there is a form submission via Ajax, it will fire an event called Ajax complete. So what I can do is I can set up a new trigger that is a custom event. And the event name I am looking for is Ajax complete. It must be in this exact form because that's what our custom HTML script is firing on every page, that when an Ajax happens, it shows Ajax complete. Then we're going to set up a new tag and I've named it GA4 event form Ajax. Tag configuration, GA4 event. Enter your measurement ID. Enter your event name. Enter the triggering. In this case, it's going to be the custom event form Ajax. Some examples of types of forms that can be Ajax are Typeform, JotForm, FormStack, HubSpot, Outdrop. Since there isn't a refresh of the page or the form itself when it's been submitted, some of the previous tracking methods we learned in this video will not work for it. The final type of form tracking we're going to look at today is iFrame forms, which are usually the most difficult. When you iframe or embed in a form, essentially it is putting a website inside of your website. When you inspect the form itself, you will see here it has iframe. Also, in this case, you can see the fact that it has this branded. It is quite obviously a different type, but it should say iframe and then have some sort of URL. And essentially, this is a website within another website. The main way to be able to track iframe forms in Google Analytics 4 does rely on you having access directly to the form software itself and going into the backend. And usually there's one of three options available when it comes to tracking these forms. These are: 1. Sending a successful form submission to a thank you page. You'll have to create that thank you page on site. Since that lives on your site and is not embedded into your site, it will fire the analytics track. 2. The ability to add the analytics tracking directly on the form itself. It may have a section for you to put in your measurement ID. And 3. The ability to fire code upon completion, which will allow us to put a small piece of code into the form itself so that when it fires that code and that notifies Google Analytics that a form submission or an event has been completed. The solution varies depending on the form provider you're using, and what I would normally suggest is running a Google search, as other people may have given a solution to this problem before, and you may be able to find a custom solution online that helps you track your specific iFramed form. If you are struggling, as always, feel free to drop me a comment or send me a message letting me know about the form provider you're using, and I'm happy to try and do some digging and help you out. Now we've talked about the 5 different ways in order to track a form, and we've set up the triggers and tags for each. Let's test and see if they work. Alongside my Google Tag Manager, I also want to open up Analytics. I want to go into Admin, Debug View. This way I can see the events that are being fired in real time. I'm going to click Preview. I want to go specifically to my test form page. Let's look at this. And we're going to see when the different events fire. Well, as in Analytics, I should see the page view come in now. we set up a different name for each event for the reason we can tell when each one is firing. So we're going to fill out this first form. And when we submit this, it's actually saying that it's an Ajax form and it hasn't sent us a thank you page. I'm going to cheat a little bit because my form has decided not to work. I'm going to say that it sent me to the thank you page. And instead, I'm going to go into preview mode once again. And we're going to go to the thank you page. We're going to pretend it sent me there, although it hasn't. And upon loading the thank you page, you will see that we have the event submission thank you in analytics. We should also see that we had a form Ajax because it was an Ajax form and the Ajax listener was there. And we also have the thank you page. Forms can be tracked in multiple ways, as you can see. Okay, let's go back now to my test page. And we're going to fill this one out anyway, show that the Ajax form is working. We also have the form element. So where we had the just thank you message visibility, this form seems to be using the same one. Thank you, your message has been sent. It's got the exact same one as the other one. So that's also fired. Now we have our iFrame form. So I'm going to fill this out. And we have this thank you message, but nothing new has fired. It's unable to read this because this is a website within a website. I would have to go to JotForm's backend, see the option. So in the backend of JotForm, I can see my form and I can potentially edit my form. Under settings here, I'm going to tell them to redirect to another page. And this page is going to be my thank you page. JotForm automatically saves the changes as you're doing them. Other forms you might need to publish or do something different. We're going to go back and now we're going to test this form again. It's always good to restart when you're making changes on the fly like this, because until you refresh, you may not get said change. Now we're going to test this iFrame. And this takes me to the thank you page. As a result, you can see that on this page, which is the thank you page, my thank you page event has fired, meaning that I should see a form thank you after all these form Ajax in my analytics. And this is how I've tracked an iFrame form easily. Again, depends on the form software you're using. Now we've tested all the different form types. The one that didn't manage to fire today is the form submission form trigger, but that's fine. It would pop up just like the other ones did, and you'd see it in analytics as well. In my purposes, it doesn't seem to have worked because none of the forms I have embedded on this site allows that functionality. We're going to stop debugging and we're going to, most importantly, submit our changes. Until we submit, nothing is live. Okay, we've published. We made sure to give it a name and description as well. Now that we've set this up and we know that the events are firing, there is still one more step before we can say we're done. This is to mark down key events, formerly known as conversions. In analytics, under your admin section, you can see events and you can mark different items as key events. As you can see here, none of my forms are in here, and that's because I've just set them up as events, so they don't appear right away. If I was to come back tomorrow or after some submissions, I will likely see them in here. Not to worry, what we can do is click on key events, go into our tag manager, look at our tags, and I'm going to take the visibility message because this is the actual form that I use. Make sure you copy the event name exactly. I tend to find it's easier, and this is why I do come into tag manager, just to literally copy and paste it. Select new key event, paste it in here. If you've used spaces like I have, replace them with underscores. I would also suggest not having any spaces in the actual event name here. So I'm actually going to go in and update this so that it matches exactly. Again, make sure you publish. Make any changes, make sure you publish. Give it a description and publish. Now this is marked as a key event or conversion. With that completed, we have now tracked our forms within Google Analytics 4. As you've probably seen in this video, there are multiple different ways to track forms in Google Analytics 4 using Google Tag Manager. find a method that works specifically for your form and one that you can easily apply. Before I let you go, I have a few tips that I would like to share. One, first, only use your core business goals as key events. Don't mark all events as key events. Two is use consistent naming. Avoid using spaces in any events. Ad blockers or cookie consent may stop analytics from collecting data. So you may have form submissions that you don't see if your users are using an ad blocker. Four is the data in analytics may be sampled. This means it's giving you estimation and not actual, so it may not match up to your data. Tracking form submissions can go from easy to pretty difficult depending on the form you're trying to track. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone and ask for help when it comes to form tracking. I'm happy to help out as well. Feel free to leave a comment in the video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.